All right. Well, this is a first interview with a new friend, Scott Mason. Good morning. You are in Charlotte, North Carolina, correct?
That's right. That's right.
Okay. And I'm doing something new. I've been doing these podcasts for some years, but I'm just starting to delve into YouTube. So, those who be
Mm,
watching on YouTube, this is the book we're going to be talking about here. And the way that came about is I think you reached out to me. You had heard about my ministry
right.
and I think listened to a podcast and
Listen to several.
asked if
Yeah.
you could send me the book, and you did, and it really resonated with me.
Thank you.
Just an overview of what we're going to talk about. It's a unique topic. I don't think there's much that I've read about this, and that is the title I'm going to use this for the podcast and the channel is respecting the pastor,
Mm,
the people respecting the pastor, because that's essentially what your book is about. Before we
right.
delve into that, tell us just briefly a little bit about yourself, what you've done, and also I like to ask what you're most passionate about.
Sure. Sure. Well, I was not raised in a Christian home. I became a believer in my mid 20s after a whole lot of searching and a big saga. Did a number of things before ending up going into ministry, but then in my later 30s, felt this call to ministry. Went became a pastor, and for was a pastor for about 15 years or so. Most of that time as a senior pastor,
Hmm.
and then ended up leaving ministry about 6 years ago, I guess 5 6 years ago, something like that.
Hmm.
So and in terms of passions, I mean, I guess I'd have to name the fairly standard ones: family, but also I'm a musician, so
Mm.
I love music, guitar players specifically.
And sing as well?
Not really.
Not so much.
I
Okay.
mean, you could say I sing, but I'm not a singer. Maybe
Okay.
we'd put it
Okay.
that way.
Hmm.
And I like to write and like to get outside and hike and that
Hmm.
kind of thing. So, but I think relative to this discussion, I mean, one of my passions is that I like to see people and groups thrive.
Hmm.
And and when I see that the waters are getting rocky for people, whether it's individuals or whether it's groups, I guess it's just my instinct to want to help if I can, if I have some ideas about how
Hmm.
maybe we could fix things. And really, it's been through that sort of led me to thinking about some of this question, because it's like,
Yeah.
how when I'm seeing the dysfunction in some churches, um, just makes you and the heartbreak that comes out of it,
Yeah. Well, talk about that a little
makes you
bit
act.
because I think this came a little bit out of your own experience. So two things. Why did you write the book? And if you had just a few minutes, you're in an airplane, people see you holding the book and they say, "Hey, what's that book about?"
Sure.
How would you sum it up?
Well, the first thing I would say is that people need to reorient themselves, because this book is not about leading, and people automatically, I find, yeah, right, it's called an Achilles heel, right?
And
That's
and
it.
the subtitle is how failure to engage constructively with pastoral authority cripples the church. So
That's
go
right.
on. Yeah.
That's right, and that's basically what I observed is that certainly you can. There's all sorts of things that cause church conflict. Sometimes it is poor leadership. A lot of the time it's poor
Yeah.
leadership, maybe,
Yeah.
and there are plenty of things that leaders can learn, and there's a lot of great material out there. And certainly sometimes it's just interpersonal issues, and there's really great literature on conflict, interpersonal conflict, and that's really important. But sometimes it has to do with the way that church members are following authority, or problems that they might be having with authority. And so my question was really, well, what do you do to equip church members to give them tools to follow better? I mean, sometimes
Yeah.
people will use muscular statements like "obey the pastor." Other people, but you don't really teach them how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And where is that taught? If it's from the pastor, that's sometimes awkward.
Exactly, very
Yeah.
awkward, right?
Yeah.
Right, very
Yeah.
awkward to do
Yeah. I
that.
mean, you're
Yeah,
really, we're going to talk about two things, the theology and the practical part of this. This might end up being two podcasts. We haven't decided on that yet. One of the things that really resonated with me, my last church experience, and people who listen to my podcast, I talk a lot about my last church. I was a lead pastor of a large church. As soon as I got there, I realized that my leadership collateral was really, really low. The
Yeah.
previous pastor had had an affair. I came in, people
Oh,
didn't
wow.
trust any pastor. Uh,
Yeah, sure.
the quotient, what is that term? Anyway, I guess I use the word collateral, and I had to earn that, and in some
Yeah.
sense, never did. And so, when I read your book, I thought, wow, if that church had had a good theology of what it means to follow the pastor, and because really what you're doing is talking about what is the responsibility of the membership of the church, because so much of the material we're going to talk about this is geared towards leaders. What
Right.
its
That's right.
title is Achilles heel. What's the Achilles heel here? Why did you give it that title?
So I tried to I used the analogy of like a runner with a blister on her heel. And clearly
Yeah, you see that
right,
on the
right,
picture there. That's painful.
right, and
My heel is hurting right now just looking at that.
that's right, that's right. And the idea is really that blister is certainly not central to what makes this runner effective. I mean, there's so many other things. There's the technique, there's all of the strength training, the endurance training. I mean, there's all sorts of things that are really the most important thing for making that runner an effective runner. The problem is that one little blister on the heel, if it's ignored and not taken seriously, will bring the whole thing down. And she
Mm.
just simply won't be, it doesn't matter how much training she's had. She's not going to be able to run. She's not going to be able to run effectively. And so what I was getting at there was, as I was developing all of this, it was very, very difficult to get people to see this, to reverse their perspective and stop looking at this as leadership literature, but as followers, is
Hmm.
following, learning to follow better. That was hard enough, but also people just didn't like the idea too much, and they ignored it, because when things are going fine, people don't pay attention to things that could be a problem. And what I was trying to say was, listen, I understand this is not the most important thing about church. There are a lot of more important things. But if this is like a blister on the heel, if it's allowed to fester, it will become a serious problem. So, it was really my attempt to kind of try to
Yeah, I
get
love it.
attention on it.
Yeah. You do talk in the book that there's so little on the subject. When you sought out to write this, you did a lot of research. By the way, was this part? I can't remember. Was this part of a dissertation?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It
for
originally
doctorate.
started as
Okay,
my doctoral dissertation. Yeah, that's
okay.
right.
So did you know on the onset that there would be that little information on that, or did that surprise you as you began to delve into it?
It's a good question. I I think it was an area that I was interested in, and I think when I started, I was frustrated with all of the different sources that people would give me when I would ask questions about this, and most all of it was leadership literature.
Yeah. Yeah. If you ask someone, a pastor, what's the latest book, or have you ever read a book about the congregation's responsibility to the pastor? They say, I never thought that is a thing, that should be a
Right.
thing. But you're exposed to it, it's like, why has this not been talked about more?
That's exactly right. And so I said, well, surely someone has thought about this, and I did find, in the secular, there's a sort of a subtopic in leadership studies called followership, and it's a secular thing.
Yeah.
And there's some academic stuff behind that, and some of it's valuable, and some of it's not, like a lot of different things. But so there's a little bit more in the secular world on this kind of a thing, but very little in the Christian world. So
Yeah. We need
I
to
decided,
spoil
yeah,
the Egyptians on this one, don't we?
you're right, right, that's right, that's it, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and the fact that there's so little out there, that's revealing, isn't it? That
It is, yeah.
so you use the word, a term that's really important in your treatment here is role authority. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So, one of the things that I observed is that people don't necessarily think too much about the idea of authority. I mean, it's just sort of something that people process at an intuitive level.
Hmm.
And therefore, it's harder to recognize the different elements of it. It's hard to recognize what their own thinking is doing. And so I try to dissect it a little bit. And so I made a distinction between what I call role authority and personal
Personal
authority.
authority. Yeah.
And role authority has to do with that comes from the actual role, so that the person plays. So if it's the pastor, for example, his authority comes from the fact that he's the pastor.
That's the
It's sort of,
office.
it's the office, it's the rank. If it, it's any way you want to sort of look at that. And that's and the thing that's important to, whereas personal authority, on the other hand, is more like, it's sort of what you talked about when you first started talking about going into this church. You didn't have a lot of street cred, so to speak, with
Yeah.
these folks. Another way to say that is you didn't have much personal authority because they
Mm.
weren't looking at you that way, now. And so that's a
Mm.
great example of when, in a certain sense, the only authority that you had was role authority. You were the pastor. But if people weren't recognizing that, then it
Yeah,
wasn't
there
help
were a
you
few.
very well.
Yeah, there were a few that did. I love when I was in Wisconsin. I was an associate pastor in a large church, and everybody comes to the associate to complain about the senior pastor.
Right.
It
That's
didn't
right. That's
happen a
right.
lot, but there were some things that were going on. And this woman, we were talking in the fellowship time around coffee, and uh, there had been something recent to the conversation about the senior pastor, and she said something to me, and it really was a way to try to strangle the gossip. She goes, as long as he's my pastor, I'm going to respect him.
Mm,
And I thought that's planting a flag. It's establishing a commitment to the office and to the role. And he wasn't doing anything illegal or moral or unwise. I don't even remember what it was. I think it was just a personality thing.
right.
So yeah, you write this, a great statement. Respecting pastoral authority would be much easier if the congregants better understood the nature of personal and role authority and had some tools to engage it. Expand on that some.
Yeah, I mean, and so just going back to the example that you used, so you come in, you're a new pastor. People are very suspicious of pastors because of their previous experience, which is I call those moments of stress. Like I said, when everything's going great, it's not
Hmm.
these things aren't really much of an issue.
Yeah, yeah, you're
It's
not
when
tested. Yeah.
That's right. It's when something like what you described has gone bad. And so if a congregant, for example, were a little bit more aware of the various kinds of authority, they might have said, look, right now, I understand my heart. It's going to be really, really hard this pastor coming in is going to have the deck stacked against him. He's not going to have a lot of personal authority with any
Yeah.
of the congregates or with me, because we're very, we're very, very nervous about pastors. We don't trust them very much. And so, on the one hand, they would recognize, but with personal authority, I understand personal authority. That's not something that pastor doesn't have. That pastor only has as much personal authority as I grant him. So if I know you don't just walk in with it. You don't walk. Whereas with role authority, you walk in with that. You
Hmm.
have role authority. Now I might not recognize it as a congregant, but you have it. But you only have as much personal authority as I, as a congregant, will give you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
as a congregant, I recognize that. So I say, okay, it's hard to give this new pastor much personal authority, but I need to spend the time to develop his personal authority in my eyes. And so I'm going to try to do that. And the reason that I recognize that is because I understand the nature of personal authority. Meanwhile, I might say to myself, okay, but because I understand the difference between role authority and personal authority, I'm going to have to, for right now, until I develop his personal authority more, I'm going to have to rely on role authority. So
Mm.
he's the pastor.
Mm.
I'm going to have to say, look, as long as he's not doing anything that I think is clearly unbiblical, I'm going to try my best. I'm going to grant him, that role authority, and I'm going to have to rely on that for a while until until he has more personal authority,
Yeah.
which may take a little while. So anyway, it's in
Yeah, that's good.
recognizing the different kinds of dynamics. It means that I, as a congregant, can react better.
You oh, and by the way, I can't remember if you brought this up in the book. I think you did, that there are cultures where this is kind of built in, the Asian culture, African culture, where it's more communal. We're a very individualistic
That's right.
nation, the West is.
Right.
And so I grew up in Southeast Asia. My parents were missionaries in Indonesia. And the respect, particularly in the church, the respect for the pastor was just built in,
That's right. That's
and
right.
that can be abused,
Right. For sure.
but I feel like they had it right. We're going to talk about Hebrews 13 later, but if you were to just capsulate biblically what being a good follower is, how would you sum that up before we break this down more?
Well, I mean, I think to a large degree, I always want to bring it back to biblical love. And, and I think that it's helpful for people to think of it that way. What does it mean?
Hmm.
What does it mean to love? To love. I mean, when you really think about loving others and you really start to break it down, um, it's a lot more than just some gushy feeling for them. There are things that, it's getting to know somebody,
Hmm.
getting to understand them better. It's trying to understand what makes their life, the kinds of challenges that they might have,
Yeah, praying for them, encouraging
praying for them,
them. Yeah.
encouraging them, right? I mean, there are so many things to love. And so I think if you start there, then you can start asking questions. Okay, I'm the follower and this is the leader. What does that mean?
Hmm.
What's it like to be a leader, and how
Yeah.
can I, as the follower, you breathe life into
Hmm.
this leader's sails rather than sucking the
Yeah,
life
and it's
out.
not a passive commitment. The fruit of that is going to be you're going to encourage your pastor. I'm attending a new church plant, and I love my role in this as just a
Yeah,
lay person because I've been in
sure,
ministry for 38 years. And he's a young guy. I call him pastor. I told him I'm
right.
going to call you pastor around people because people need to hear that.
That's right.
And I'm going to pray for you and let you know I'm praying for you. And so this is yeah. We'll talk a little bit more, just in terms of how to do this. But man, there are practical ways to demonstrate that love, as you said.
There are, and let me say this too. I mean, I'm with you right now. I'm just a layman at a church, and I think the world of the pastor, and I try my best to be a good follower and to
Hmm.
breathe life into it,
I love it.
into it. But the point that I want to make, based on what you just said, is that I think that is demonstrates an important thing. You and I have sat in that chair, so we probably, unlike the vast majority of people in a church, understand really what it feels like to sit in that chair. And so, and most people don't. And
Yeah.
you can empathize a lot better when you do, and respect. That's one way to develop personal authority for towards somebody else. Someone's personal authority. That's one way to develop that, is to really understand what it feels like to sit in that chair. And so I think that's probably one reason why you're such a blessing to your pastor now.
I hope so. Yeah, yeah, and you as well with your pastor. That's pastors need that.
Yeah.
Fro, as you've looked at the landscape here, how bad is it?
Well, I think
And feel free to refer to, you did a lot of research here, so maybe talk a little bit about what you discovered in the research.
sure. So, in looking over the sources, I found that there was very little in terms of sources. There was sort of some more, I found more on abstract writing about authority.
Hmm.
There was a lot more about that. But
Oh, tons. Yeah.
in terms of just practical tools to help uh, church members become more followers, there's very little. So that's one thing. But I think then, in terms of just my own field research and actually talking to the people that I talked to, one of the things that I found was that even what I would consider the healthiest church members were still very unequipped
Mm.
with the skills they needed. And so, in a certain sense, it was like, well, they were healthy, and their pastors really thought of them as very
But not
healthy.
intentional.
Right, that's right. And so, what one wonders is because since even the healthiest members did not have these tools, it makes you wonder, well, what happens in a terrible situation like you
Yeah.
described, where
Yeah.
there's an infidelity or something like that happens? How do they react then?
Hmm.
And so you figure if even the healthiest, those considered to be the healthiest, most mature church members didn't have these tools, you think, well, those that are less mature and less healthy, they probably really don't have them. So yeah, I think it's pretty widespread, really.
Talk about the process that you use for your research. Who did you interview? How did that go?
Yeah. So what I did was I asked pastors. I found a number of pastors. I tried my best to get a sample set of different kinds of churches, so different polities, some different denominations,
Hmm. Good.
different sort of cultural makeups, and so on and so forth. Because one of the things my advisors were interested in is to see how this played across different cultural lines.
Hmm.
And I wish I'd been able to make a larger sample set. It'd be nice if some future researcher would be able to do that, but I was somewhat limited. But at any rate, so what I did was I identified these pastors and I asked them. I said, okay, look, give me several different congregants in your congregation, and some who you would consider to be extremely great followers. I mean, the kind that you love leading them. I mean, they just
Hmm.
make your life a wonder, a joy. And then some that maybe are somewhere in the middle, and then a few that are really challenging for
That
you.
was the tough one, I'm sure, for
Right.
pastors. Yeah.
It was difficult to get this sample set.
Yeah. Yeah. You
Um,
mentioned on those that the pastor perceived as being difficult that your impression was a little different when you interviewed them. Uh,
right. Well,
yeah.
yeah, because I asked them. I said, "Don't tell me which ones are which."
Oh, yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Right. I said, "I don't want to know that. We'll do that later. But
Interesting.
right now, don't tell me which ones are which." So they gave me just a list of these folks, and I went and I interviewed them, and I asked a lot of open-ended questions because I just really wanted to let them speak and kind of observe their reactions and their responses and all of this. And I recorded and transcribed all those conversations, and then using a research method called grounded theory, I went through and you identify different kinds of data elements, and you code them according to these, and then you can manipulate the data and all sorts of things like that, and then
Hmm.
try to determine some patterns. And so that's what I did. And so there's a whole chapter showing a lot of different
Yeah,
result
and the
raw
charts that
data
you used,
results.
yeah, the charts you used to sum that up are really easy to follow. I'm not a charts
Okay.
guy. I was like, I turn it around
Right.
times, but you did a good job summing that up. Um, I don't know how easy this would be to do, but you do summarize 6 things that you discovered from your research. If you could maybe just go over those briefly.
Sure. So the first one, and this was from the field research, from analyzing that field research and trying to make these observations. So the first finding was that the congregants that I interviewed were heavily dependent upon personal authority as their incentive to
Mm,
follow pastoral leadership. So what that means is that if you come into a church like you did with zero personal authority, you're in trouble because
hmm.
most of them are using that to determine whether they're going to follow you or not. The second finding is that congregants demonstrated varying degrees of an underdeveloped concept of role authority and submission.
Mm,
And so what that means is that, okay, so you come into that church, you didn't have any personal authority. That's what they mostly would rely on.
hmm.
Even those that recognize that, you're the pastor, so we got to try to do our best to
Yeah,
follow
and
you.
people bring their previous experiences with them as well,
Right.
don't they?
Right. That's right. But even that, they had a very underdeveloped, what I called an underdeveloped concept of role, authority, and
Hmm.
submission. They had some vague kind of
Yeah.
idea that, he's the pastor, I should probably, somehow follow him. The Bible says
Mm.
something about submitting to authority, but that doesn't sound good to me. It wasn't very developed. They couldn't get their
Yeah.
heads
Touch
around
not
stuff.
the anointed one.
Right. So something like that. And then of course the reaction there is, well, I'm not going to do that. That sounds
Yeah.
bad. So anyway, so they
Hmm.
they weren't equipped. And then so that was the second finding. The third finding was that what congregants think of pastors in general has a significant impact on their ability to follow the specific pastor that they're interacting with. So
Wow.
what they think of the class of pastors as a class, is going to have is going
Hmm.
to
Hmm.
transfer. And that may seem sort of obvious, but I don't think it's obvious to everybody. And
Yeah.
there are implications there because the implications are that someone should really examine, well, what do I think of pastors? Because what I found was that some of these people that I interviewed who were considered the sort of the most difficult parishioners, they had a very low view of pastors in general.
Yeah.
In general. So the fourth finding was that even some of the most mature congregants were unaware of the complex and sometimes extreme nature of certain types of church conflict and what would really be involved in dealing with them. I mean, a lot of the time they would think that these things are way easier. Come on, pastor, you should be able to deal
Yeah.
with this. It's just if it were me, this is what I would do.
Yeah. Right.
This
Right.
kind of thing. But as you know, there are so many different things that people don't
Hmm.
know in the congregation that and you can realize, boy, this is a really complicated issue, and just so many people aren't aware of that. So it's harder for them to empathize
Hmm.
with the situation of a pastor. And then the fifth one was that congregants do have some shared ideas with pastors about what makes good followers, but how they implement those beliefs is less clear. In other words, when you start talking about this stuff, congregants and pastors may use some of the same language, but what I found is that what they actually mean by that language, what they're actually conceptualizing, can be very, very different. And so that can make it
Yeah.
even worse because they think they're speaking the same language, but really they're talking about two different things.
Yeah. Lenses are different. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then the last one was just some miscellaneous observations. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's right. I remember point six when I was looking at that. That's there wouldn't be a lot to, and you'd have to read the book to see what the miscellaneous ones are.
right. I just wanted to
So
include those.
I'd like to just tackle here. We're probably jumping ahead a little too far, but this probably would be a good time to talk about how do you nurture this within a church. Um, and it's easier if it's this church plant that I'm part of. We took all summer. We started in January, but we took all summer, met at a park on Sunday afternoon, and the pastor taught, equipped us for the church plant. And there were a couple sessions where he talked about who the pastor is, his
Mm,
responsibility, and your responsibility to the pastor. And it was so refreshing, and
yeah.
he earned respect from that, not because of his the personal authority, but by going biblically to role authority.
Hmm.
And so that it's easier in a church plant where people are, well, of course, everybody comes in with their perceptions, previous experiences, but it is a fresh start.
Sure. Right.
And
Yeah.
he's
Sure.
done a great job establishing theology of the role, but a lot of emphasis on what this means for you. And
Mm.
everybody's becoming a member. I mean, we're like
Oh
100
wow.
people. 80% are under age 40,
Yeah.
and we're hosting the inquiry classes here. There's like 20 of them each time. People are
Oh,
just
how about that?
hungry to be part of this, and they want to
Yeah,
follow
that's
him.
great.
It's beautiful to see.
It
The other
is.
thing, when I was an interim pastor at a church about an hour from here, Presbyterian church, and during the year that I preached through Timothy, and
Mm.
I just thought about that this was something that I believe the Lord called me to do, is to teach the congregation what their responsibility is to the pastor. And so First Timothy was a great place to do that.
Right.
Any other thoughts on how you nurture this within a church?
Well, I mean, I think you've discussed some great ways to do it. And really,
I
when I
think I'll
wrote,
write a book about it.
yeah, yeah. Well, really, this book itself is not geared towards the average layman. I mean,
Hmm.
I actually have plans to write another one that you could like put in the hands.
Yeah, it is geared more to the leader, to the
Yeah,
pastor. Yeah,
yeah,
but you have to. I
and
think
to
you have to
somebody,
start there. Yeah.
right, and to maybe somebody interested in doing this research. I wanted to sort of establish a beachhead that people could use, so that they were at least that much further ahead in this. But my idea would be that people would take some of the ideas and put them in more digestible form. But I think the thing the only thing I'd add to what you just said is, as you mentioned, it's really important. It's an awkward thing for the pastor himself
Hmm.
to teach, and so it's great that if you get, for example, some elders or something like that walking people through or an interim pastor. I think
Hmm.
it's a great opportunity for an interim pastor, because it doesn't feel self-serving for an interim
Can the
pastor.
pastor also take his elders through something like this book, equipping them,
Yeah,
and then they can influence They're representing the congregation anyway, so starting with them might
right.
be a good
Yeah, I
thing.
think that would be something very appropriate, because elders, they're going to be held to a higher account. And so I think, yeah, the pastor going through this book with the elders and putting it in the hands of the elders, I think that would be potentially very appropriate.
Yeah,
And then they could come up with some materials that they could use
yeah.
to teach
You do talk about how a lot of church conflict happens because of this problem. Uh,
yeah.
expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
And how would we handle conflict better if we had a good theology of following?
sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think the the thing is, when there's conflict in a church, people oftentimes, I mean, I had, like you, I had a couple of actually very difficult experiences. And and I came into a church. One of the churches where I had some difficulty was, I came into a church after a guy who had been there for 30 years, and he was a beloved pastor. But
Mm, mm,
he was a great guy, but he had his strengths and he had his weaknesses, like all of us do. And he had tried to move the church was a highly congregational church, and he had tried to move. He thought that was unhealthy, and it was causing a lot of divisions and little fiefdoms. And I think he had tried
mm,
to move it to more of an elder led church. But he was in a very awkward situation. He wasn't really able to do that very well. But he helped walk them through a process of rewriting their bylaws and so on.
mhm,
And so and then he retired. And then when I came in, um, I was told that they wanted to sort of implement this. And but it was extremely difficult, and they would have had to really trust me to help to guide them through moving this from a highly congregational to more of an elder led church. And what I found in that process was, certainly there were those who just, they were the power brokers, and now and they were sort of, in some cases, they were bullying some others. And if I came in and tried to say, no, we're not going to do that anymore,
mhm,
they just had it in for me, and they just, and so that was just
mhm,
pretty clear that that was the issue. However, what I found also was that there were a lot of people who just didn't know how to engage with me. They just didn't know, should we give you that kind of authority? Should we not
mhm,
give you that kind of authority? This is what we're used to. How should we think about all of this? And so, not having those tools, I don't think they weren't bad people. They didn't
mhm,
have, any kind of nefarious motives. There were a handful of those people who I would describe as having, very negative motivations, but they weren't most of them. Most of them were people who just didn't have the tools.
mhm.
But the problem is that was enough, and it made the whole situation extremely painful for everyone, and I ended up um, having to leave.
Mm, mm. And that obviously shaped a lot of your thinking and no doubt
Absolutely,
motivated you to address this. Well, thanks for
absolutely.
sharing that. Yeah, that's hard to hear. Um, and we always hope that our difficult experiences are redemptive, and they always are. As we trust Christ and follow Him, and for you to maybe that you would not have looked into this if that experience had not happened, which makes it easier, but it's still hard.
Right.
Let's,
And I should say, Mitch, if I could
yeah.
also just add one quick thing. Also involved in that kind of complex
Hmm.
soup there certainly were leadership things too. I mean, I made
Yeah.
leadership
Yeah.
mistakes. And so I, as a leader, would have certainly benefited and did benefit,
Hmm.
from thinking about, about leadership and those kinds of questions. But my point was, it wasn't all about leadership. Even one of the things I've observed is even the best leaders, most equipped leaders, if you don't have followers who are going to, it's a dance. It's a
Yeah.
two-way street.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
it
know,
has to start with a commitment that we want to learn and be obedient to something
right,
that seems new to us. And
right,
and unfortunately it's new because it hasn't been really emphasized a lot.
right.
Let's jump into scripture. Where would you go to in scripture to see this happening? And I know you spend a wonderful amount of time and emphasis on Hebrews 13, verses 7 through 9.
Right. Right. Yeah, I selected that one because it's just sort of the most sort of the clearest exhortation to following that I think that I found in Scripture. It doesn't pull any
Yeah.
it doesn't pull any punches. It's just pretty straightforward, and you can
Yeah,
build
I
on it.
as you're talking, I should have looked this up. I think it'd be good to read this. Can I do that real
Yeah,
quick?
please, please.
Okay, so Hebrews 13. I feel like I'm doing a sword drill here. I
Yeah,
found it. Raise my hand.
right,
All right, remember your leaders, those who spoke to you the word of God. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever.
right. Yeah. Yeah, well, right. And and there's also, different translations will talk about, do it, let them do this with joy and not with groaning,
Yeah.
or that would be of no benefit to you, and so on. And so, um, yeah, I thought that was just a pretty straight. It's packed, and so I spent a lot of time
Yeah.
really dissecting it and trying to pull.
Actually, I'm gonna. I
Yeah,
think I meant 17. That's important too, but it's really 17 and 18. Obey your leaders and submit to them. This is where we really
right.
need to be.
That's yeah.
For they are
That's
keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for that would be of no advantage to you.
right, right. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's very pithy. It just kind of it really provides some guidance. Like I said, it doesn't pull any punches. And one
Hmm.
of the things that I think is clear is you've got to be clear about it. A lot of people, they just don't like the idea of authority. And I think a lot of that comes from the sort of this fiercely independent culture we have, influenced by a lot of maybe the postmodern kinds of
Hmm.
influences that we have these days. I mean, just this idea everyone's suspicious of power. Power and authority are always necessarily evil and these kinds of things. And I think people just don't like it. And so anytime you have to touch on that, people get jittery.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
my point is, don't get jittery. Embrace it. Face it full on. This is biblical stuff, but make sure you understand it. And I think biblically, Jesus didn't pull punches. I mean, he said, "You call me Lord, and so I am."
Hmm.
He didn't say, "You call me Lord, but shucks, folks." I mean,
Hmm.
it's not
Yeah.
all that. I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
he was not. He was clear. And yet he was. It's incredibly He was the ultimate sacrificial leader. He used his authority to try and create an environment where people could thrive. And I think if people understand that authority certainly can be abused, we all know that. But if it also should be redeemed. It should be used for good in good ways, in good healthy
Yeah.
ways. So yeah,
Yeah.
so that's why I just wanted to be clear about it. In 13:17, Hebrews is very clear.
Yeah, that is our church uses that verse as reason for becoming a member. People say, "Hey, where does it say in the Bible that we should become a member?" We'll
Mm,
point to that.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, we talked before recording on the importance too of understanding the qualifications of an elder, so how important is that to being a good follower, to having a theology of submission?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's interesting, I would say a couple of things. I mean, one is it helps it just helps people to develop their, well, both personal authority and the role authority of
Hmm.
the pastor. The more you understand the high bar that pastors really are expected to meet. They're not going to be perfect, and they shouldn't be held to any kind of perfection.
Hmm.
They're not going to meet that standard, but certainly they're held to an account. And if you just read through, for example, First Timothy 3 the kinds of qualifications that are
Hmm.
there, it's sobering.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I don't know if I don't know if I'd like to be
Yeah.
held to that account.
Yeah. And in some way we're helping them to be that by again, it's the role authority. We're submitting to the office, and the more we do that, we're empowering the pastor to do what he's called to do, you know.
Right.
If we resist it, then it makes it more difficult for him to be uh, you know, well, yeah, yeah. I wanted to go on a rabbit trail there, but I'll stop myself.
Yeah, sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah, you talk about. I love this phrase, a cross-bearing pastor. Um, what do you mean by that, and how important is that?
Well, here again, I mean, this goes back to what authority, what biblical authority is, and it's really important to disregard a lot of the other kinds of definitions of authority that we get from a lot of other sources, but to really think about authority. The Bible does not pull punches. Authority is authority. It's to be respected
Hmm.
for clearly. On the other hand, authority is there, and one of the reasons that it is to be expected or to be respected is that it is designed sort of for everyone's benefit.
Hmm.
And so and one of the and so somebody who has been entrusted with authority, and really we're all entrusted with authority in variety of in certain settings. I mean, all of
Hmm.
us are leaders in some settings and followers in others. But if you're entrusted with authority, don't be falsely modest about it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
embrace it and recognize what it's for. That it's a good. It should be anyway a good thing.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that you can understand that is by understanding that it is to be sacrificial. It is to be wielded for the benefit of other people, not for self-serving
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
purposes.
Peter talks about that, right? About not abusing that authority. That we're to recognize the awesomeness of this responsibility and carry it out with a servant heart. It's a win-win, isn't it? Because when the pastor is serving as a leader, he's a servant leader. It empowers the people to submit to that. It's like marriage, you know. Husband, love
Right,
your wives. The more you love him, the more she's going to want to submit.
right.
If the pastor's leading with humility, people are going to long to want to follow a pastor like that. It doesn't always happen.
That's right.
It's a critical piece of it.
But let me use this just as an example, just to show you where this can easily drift over, and you can reverse the telescope and look down the wrong end of
Hmm.
it when we're talking about following. And that is that, yes, absolutely, leaders should be sacrificial leaders. If you're teaching a leader to lead, you're gonna dwell on that. What does it mean to be a sacrificial leader?
Hmm.
And so you're gonna have that discussion, and it's very relevant to leadership. But to followership, it's less relevant. Here's what I mean by that:
Mm.
is that if when you think if when you start thinking about how can I be a better follower, and your answer is, well, if the pastor is a more sacrificial leader, I can be a better follower. That's thinking of it from the perspective of leadership. It's not thinking of it from the
Interesting.
perspective
Yeah.
of
Mm.
followership. And this
Mm.
is where it's so subtle, but it's so
And
important.
it's almost conditional
Turn
that
this around. That's
he
right.
needs to do his job if I'm in your mind. Yeah, that's a
Exactly.
really good point.
And here's where that becomes a problem. It's like, okay, how do you define sacrificial? You could get 5 different church members, and they could all define sacrificial leadership. And this is what my research found. They could all define sacrificial leadership differently. So if one person says, oh, well, this is not a very sacrificial leader, but another person thinks, oh no, I think he's a very sacrificial leader. If that's what you're relying on, then you're going to get into trouble. So this is what I'm saying. You got to make sure you don't turn the telescope around and look down the
Yeah.
wrong end.
I
It's really
appreciate that
hard to do.
clarity. Yeah. That's really good. Really good. You give motivation for this. You call them moral obligations. There's 3 of them. Go over those, and then we'll wrap up here.
Yeah, yeah. So, I called it I tried to create based upon those Hebrews 13 texts. I tried to create a very, very simple sort of theology of
Hmm.
following to do that. And and I did say it's a moral obligation to follow pastoral authority. And what I mean by that is a moral obligation would be an obligation to do something. It means you ought to do
Hmm.
the thing in question. And if you don't do it, then you'd call it a sin against God. And of course,
Hmm.
that's not an exhortation to blind leadership or to drink some kind of poison Kool-Aid or anything like that.
Hmm.
There are parameters. But the first reason I think it's a moral obligation is that I think that submitting to pastoral authority is commanded by God. I mean, just
Hmm.
very, 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 very simply, I think it's a command. And the second reason is that it's a moral obligation is that submitting to pastoral authority is beneficial to pastors,
Hmm.
whereas resisting pastoral authority can be very hurtful,
Yeah.
to pastors. And pastors carry a burden because of the nature of their work and because of the account they're going to give to God. And so I think that the Hebrews text is really clear about that.
Hmm.
And then the third reason is that it's a moral obligation is that submitting to pastoral authority is beneficial to the church. And where again, resisting pastoral authority can be hurtful to the church. And I
Yeah.
think that you can
Really
see
good. Yeah.
examples of that.
Hmm.
Um, and most scholars sort of in that Hebrews 13:17 think that little statement that would be of no advantage to you if you
Yeah.
resist it is a kind of a ironic almost understatement.
Hmm.
Say, yeah, this
Yeah.
really
That's
is
a
very good
yeah.
and not good
Yeah.
at all.
It's a win-win for everybody.
Right, and it is a win-win.
And it's helpful too when you're obeying or submitting your pastor, it's the way you're submitting to the Lord, right?
Right,
Because he's the head of the church. Just like husband loves your wives, you're loving Christ by loving your wife. You're
that's right,
submitting to Christ by submitting to your husband.
that's right.
Yeah. We covered everything, I think. If a, if you were to talk to a pastor and he's interested, his heart is really excited and burdened for this. And where would he start? How would you encourage him? Maybe we've touched on that already, but how would you sum that up?
Well, you mean interested in this in the topic and so on,
Yeah, yeah. Where
interested
does he
in it.
start? Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, not
Buy the
not to be
book.
not to be self-serving. I'm certainly not going to be making any kind of millions off of this. I've put it on my Substack, and you can look up Scott Mason on Substack, and I'm publishing the book section at a time for
Hmm.
free on
Yeah,
there.
I've been getting those. Those are really good. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I just put it out there, and because again, I'm really not trying to build a kingdom
Hmm.
or sell books per se. I just want to try to offer something. I've done
Hmm.
some work on this and some thinking about it, and I want to put it out there for the church. So you can just read it for free there. Um, but buying the book certainly. I've tried to make it practical. So the first chapter really goes over a summary, and then at the end of the first chapter there's a chapter summary so that you could skip around, and I try to
Yep.
say, here's the reason, here's the flow of this whole
Hmm.
book, and you can skip around and find the parts that you want. One of the things we didn't touch on, but the last couple of chapters, I try to put all sorts of different, just very, very practical tools that people can use to think through things. What do I do specifically if the pastor makes a decision that I don't agree with?
Hmm.
How do I process that? I mean, I can either just be mad about it and,
Hmm.
and just be confused and be stressed and all this, or someone can put some tools in my hand where I
Hmm.
can think about a step by step. Here's the way I can process that.
Yeah. It's
And,
really asking
and
what is the
so
right thing to do here? How can I obey God in my response to this?
right, right. And I think my experience as a pastor, I didn't want to just tell somebody, you know, be filled with the Spirit.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know, people would say, great. And the people who
Yeah.
were shy would just say, thank you, Pastor. That's wonderful. And they'd walk away and they
Yeah.
thinking,
No, there needs to be
how do I do that?
directives. Yeah.
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 So I was always interested in, okay, what step by step, what does that mean? How can I do it?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's the same with this. If you're going to say, obey your leaders and love them through your obedience. And what does that mean? Constructive
Yeah.
obedience. It's not blindly
What's it going to
following.
look like?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're contributing too. You're not just saluting and marching on. You're
Hmm.
engaging in a
Yeah.
productive way. You're really loving them and helping them and so on.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent.
and uh, and so how do I do that? And I just really wanted
Hmm.
to give people nuts and bolts on how to do it.
Yeah, it ends very practically. Yeah, really you talk about the problem, the theology, and then the practice towards the end. Really well done. Well,
Thank you.
great. I like to close by asking if roles are reversed, and you were asking me a question about this. What would you ask?
Yeah, I mean, I would just love to know from your experience as a pastor, as you read the book, was there anything in there? What was the most surprising thing, or what did you
Mm.
find to be the most useful
You know,
based on your own
yeah,
experience?
yeah, no, that's a great question. It's weird that this is something that I've not thought of. I've been motivated my whole life, my ministry. How can I be a good leader? And the thought of placing in the hands of people practical ways to look to me and to benefit from my ministry. That's what surprises me that this is, and again, the fact that there's so little resources out there. I don't know if we're so busy doing our own thing that we don't think about this. I mean, it's again after reading the book, it's like, duh,
Yeah,
this is ministry 101.
sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it was just really helpful for me. And after reading it, I was really eager to get a hold of you and talk to you about it. And I appreciate, and I do like the fact that you do give practical ways to do this. And
Mm,
it's hard because we're sinners. The church is full of sinners, and they're going to
of
behave
course.
sinfully. And so for the pastor to be a cross-bearing servant, so do the people. And this big question, what is the right thing to do, really is at the heart of this thing. And this stuff that, we can write along really well until there's conflict, and this is when we're tested. The nature of who we are
Right.
is revealed, particularly in crucibles, and um, and
Absolutely.
and sometimes that's too late to develop a theology on this. We need to have it before hard times come up, and we do that with marriage. You get married,
Right.
you get premarital counseling. You know there's going to be hard days, and when there are, it's like, yeah, we made a commitment to each other. The role of husband and wife is important, and God says, love your husband, love your wives, submit to your husband. uh, that means the most when you go through a hard time, when you're tested. It's the
Right.
same thing with churches. So
Yeah. And it's really hard to do that when you're under stress. And
absolutely,
so it's
absolutely.
when your head is clear and things are pretty good. That's when
Yeah,
you should
yeah,
develop the tools.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Scott, thank you so much. You did a great job summarizing everything, and I'm glad we got this all done in less than an hour.
Well, likewise, Mitch. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your interest. It means a lot to me.
Thank you so much, Scott. Lord bless
Yeah.
you.
You too.